Welcome to Senate Education. It is Tuesday, February 8th at 1:32. We're going to start our work today by returning to S-189, an act relating to the status of Holocaust education in public schools. We're then going to pick up our work on team mascots at round 2, and then finish the day with miscellaneous changes to education law. And so with that, Ms. Garces, great to have you with us again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So last we left it, you were going to do a little digging, do a little work for us, and come back and share some additional thoughts and information. So with that, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, Chair, Champion, and members of the committee. Campion, I just changed your name to Champion. Sorry about that. And members of the committee for the opportunity to provide testimony on S-189. My name is Amanda Garces, and I am the Director of Policy, Education, and Outreach for the Vermont Human Rights Commission. Today, I want to start by saying again and acknowledging the need to teach about the Holocaust in our public schools, and to thank the students who testify in this committee for their work in advancing this conversation. I also would like to acknowledge our Vermont educators and all the work they do for our kids, and want to thank them for their efforts amidst this pandemic. We can all agree that the Holocaust and other hard histories must be taught to our students, and that it is in fact imperative to equip our students and communities with the right information and to have the tools to avoid harming our students and communities. With the current state of technology and information, we can spend countless of hours downloading lesson plans from the internet. I did that, preparing for this. If we want to do this right, we need to offer our educators with the right tools so that they can feel comfortable. In 2021, a teacher in DC was placed on leave after third graders were made to reenact episodes from the Holocaust. Third graders. I will not go on those details, but the harm that was made was revolting. And when I submit my testimony, you can see the article in there. In 2020, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, held a panel discussion titled Holocaust Education in Crisis. And I would like to draw a quote from Deborah Dwork, who is the founding director of the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at the Graduate Center, CUNY. And she says, we're looking at the Holocaust education issue the wrong way around. We need to focus on the teachers, not the students and pupils. And we need to move from teacher trainings, workshops, day programs to teacher education. Teachers teach materials with which they are comfortable, that they feel confident presenting. They teach what they learned when they were at college or university. Until colleges, universities routinely offer courses on the history of the Holocaust, teachers will never get the robust education they need to be successful in the classroom. Gretchen Skidmore, another panelist who was also there, echoed that sentiment and said, background knowledge and sense of pedagogy around this complex history is lacking among teachers. There's an urgent need for teacher education. I recommend watching the recording of the event, and I will also send that as a resource. But I brought those quotes because I think it's important to put it in the context that is conversation happening in many places, that this is a global conversation around teaching this history and where we need to place our resources. We need to do it right. What I'm recommending today is that we put the resources to make this successful. The students want to learn hard histories, we know that, and they want it done right. Educators also want to teach hard histories, and they want the support to get the right tools. In 2020, a student group called Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network surveyed over 200 students about the state of their schools and how they teach about racism and other topics. It is very informative, and I will also be submitting that. And if you have not had any of those students in your committee, I strongly recommend that you invite them. As a matter of fact, they've worked with the House Representatives to introduce Bill H-584, which proposes to create an anti-racism certification program for schools that recognize full the history, contributions, and perspectives of ethnic and other groups consistent with the Act 1 work. In a similar vein of the students who wrote S-181, students want to learn and students want to write. In addition to teaching the hard history of the Holocaust, slavery, and the genocide experienced by indigenous people, a student must also learn and teach about the resistance of those communities. Today, I'm recommending and borrowing from the report that the Act 1 did last year, which was the thought was to have a cohort of teachers to learn about these subjects. That part never went anywhere, but we had requested because we had been in conversation with some universities. But what I'm bringing today is, and I'm gonna quote from that report, and I will also submit it as you can see it in case we don't remember, but, and we say it in that report. The ultimate success of ethnic and social equity studies in Vermont public schools will depend on the commitment, intellectual acumen, and creative energies of educators, support professionals, administrators, school boards, and concerned individuals in our local communities. With dedicated long-term professional guidance and resources from the Agency of Education and other state bodies, school personnel will need professional training. A successful training program will collaborate with local groups. This is not part of that, but this is what I'm adding, with the expertise in the subject matter. In this case, we have the Vermont Holocaust Memorial and other leading national groups that are doing this work and that have developed cutting edge information. We have, if we are talking about slavery, we have the Clemens Family Farm that developed their Windows to the Multicultural World curriculum for K through 12th grade, which is really amazing, and teachers have taken this training. And we have the Abenaki educators in our state who also do this training, or who also work with educators. The objectives of the program will incorporate communities here, and we'll have threefold objectives: a ground school personnel in a critical and comprehensive understanding of the history, pedagogy, academic, and social context needed to make this a reality. So we think that this cannot just be a group, 5 teachers taken, but that school districts and local communities can work together to make this happen. It can't be in a vacuum. We need to assist educators to attain proficiency and confidence in developing curricular lessons plans, sourcing the digital, print, and multimedia resources, and in facilitating classroom instruction, student evaluation, staff development, and community-based projects. So this will go hand in hand with thinking that it cannot be in a vacuum and that there's just so much information, so much that, if you don't have enough support to get the right thing. And to train the cadres of educators and other school personnel. So we're imagining, regional hubs of teachers that are willing to do that and that will fit in some of those standards that currently exist, that people can draw and to develop this curriculum. So that's what we're bringing today. I think that this needs to be a multi-faceted approach where we are supporting the educators, but also that, we are collaborating with already the local expertise that we have in the Holocaust specifically, but that if we're going to do something like that, that we should expand it to also talk about those hard histories, because if not, every year we're going to be coming back. All the groups are going to be coming back. We want to learn this too, so let's do it all at once.
So you haven't submitted written testimony yet, correct?
No, I will submit it with a lot of resources
Okay.
that I'm bringing in, and who are the people that we know that are teaching some of this history.
And so, Ms. Garces, correct me if I'm wrong. I think my takeaway are two key points. Number one, what is being taught? How are our teachers being trained to teach this at the university level, at the college level? In other words, this would be an opportunity for us to check in with the state colleges, with UVM, to understand, as it relates to, we can't control their, curriculum. Well, per se, in a way that, the state does have a licensing piece, but to give us a sense of what's happening there. And then the second piece, it sounds like, but please correct me if I'm wrong, you're endorsing our idea of adding funds to the agency of education, having somebody as a point person in the agency in a similar way that we tackled literacy, where that person can work with teachers, training teachers, creating teachers to train teachers, more of a real approach to this topic and to this subject.
Correct.
Is there anything else that I'm missing in terms of takeaway?
No, I think the last.
Because honestly, sometimes I just repeat what I really do want to hear, honestly, and so if I am missing something, please tell me.
No, I would just add that it's really important to collaborate with the community when it comes to this. So whoever has the expertise in our community in Vermont, so that it is, from the experience, and that, because I think, people that take on these jobs, we might know a lot, but also like it is not the expertise per se. So I think we need to draw from the expertise of the people who do this on a daily basis, who live this in a daily basis, who understand the concepts in a more dynamic way.
So I guess my final question would be, would you help us draft some language if the committee decides to go this way? In other words, this would be a full-time equivalent at the agency of education. We'd be putting in a request to look at, to support, first of all, some of the work that's being done there right now. We've heard and we've talked about this in terms of, I think, the way the committee's feeling that there are some staffing issues, that we need to staff up. We need to support the work that's being, the people that are there, and increase the kind of supports that exist. What might, if we were to get really specific, what might we want a full-time equivalent to actually do in addition to Holocaust work? What are some of the other things around anti-racism, around, what are the things that we can sort of incorporate into that position? Just something for you to think about. Yeah,
I will be happy to work with someone in the agency, maybe to think through this, and also just, I think it is important to hear from the other pieces. And, I don't like this bill specifically was the Holocaust, so I want to honor that, but I also just, and so why I'm bringing all these other perspectives too is because we will be going back and forth every year to this. And so this is real need to talk about slavery the right way, to talk about the Holocaust the right way, to talk about the genocide. So I think there is a great opportunity for us to bring this. Here's some hard histories we want our students to learn. Here are the tools they're gonna need, and for you to put the money to support that work is super important. So, but I do want to honor the fact that this was a Holocaust bill, and I just want to bring that up.
Yeah. No, we wouldn't be doing this if I think Senator Terenzini, I mean, I don't think it would be on our minds like it is. Senator Perchlik, if he hadn't proposed it.
Yeah, thanks. Amanda, when you say we, you're talking about the Human Rights Commission or the Ethnic Studies Committee, or both?
Correct. I am speaking up today on behalf of the Human Rights Commission, but a lot of my work on this draws from the Act One Working Group. And I mean, like I said, the last year, the working group made a set of recommendations to kind of, this idea that we do need to have some cohort of teachers that could start learning some of the things that we will be bringing up in our standards recommendations, but that's not, so a lot of this is very aligned to a lot of the working group members, but I am not, I haven't brought this up to them. So, but I think it is very aligned, and I'll be happy to, we actually have a meeting on the 17th I'll be happy to get some feedback from them and send you something. It's 23 members.
Great, because it seems like, yeah, and it seems like, yeah, they're aligned, and I know that work of that one working group continues. So this just seems like a way to lift up that work and make it stronger. And so anything we can do to help.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes.
And Ms. Garces, it would be helpful, I think. So what we're going to start working on is a letter to appropriations outlining, why this is important. And we would also want the Agency of Education, Secretary French and his team or at least Secretary French, to respond to this kind of, what we would really be doing in the agency. Historically, I think it's safe to say we've been told the agency's okay. We've got the supports that we need, but clearly, I, for one, believe that we need to improve those. So if you would be willing to give us a paragraph or two that might incorporate some of the things that you've heard today, that would be great.
Yes. I plan to submit something tomorrow with more.
Oh, that'd be good. Yeah, that's right. That's great. That's right.
I went to a rabbit hole with all the resources out there.
Good. Senator Terenzini, how are you feeling about this direction? This is something that is important to all of us, but you should be credited with bringing this issue in the way you did and raising it, which has continues to be raised in the press and in different communities. I know I've heard from people recently, having read the Rutland Herald or Vermont Digger, of some of the coursework that they did that was transformational, and others are concerned, as we all are, that this issue isn't reaching young people like it is.
Yeah, well, thank you, Senator Kimmy. I'm encouraged by all the healthy discussion we've had around this subject, and like you said, I've heard from people of all different walks of life, whether they're in education or students or retirees or people from different faith backgrounds. I also am really excited about this bill because, we know how partisan, maybe not as much in Vermont, but we know how partisan politics is today. And folks from all different political parties are showing great excitement about this, and it's bringing us together, for one sort of common good. So I'm liking the direction we're going in, and I think it's really important that we keep going down this path.
So you like the idea, if we could get it in the budget, full-time person at the agency to work on this and other issues related to it, if you will. You're okay with that? Oh.
Yeah, okay. I mean, to me, when this idea came to me, it's as simple as saying, okay, we want to figure out how do we get, every history teacher in the state equipped and prepared to teach about this event, right? But as we've had more discussions and as this thing has evolved, it sounds like it's bigger than just saying to every high school principal, hey, make sure your history teachers are teaching this coursework.
Yeah, I think we have a real opportunity here. And so I'll be eager to hear if the administration also supports it. But we've got Senator Terenzini, we can always send up to talk to the governor if need be.
I'll make sure to do that.
All right. And we are recording, so we're going to hold you to that. No, I would certainly think the governor, I'll be surprised if we get real pushback. I think this is the right way to go and continues the work that Ms. Grasses and so many other people have been working on. Other questions for Amanda? Comments? Okay. Any final comments from you, Ms. Garces?
No, I really appreciate the time, and thank you for really thinking through this so that we can do it right.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much.
Good to see you. Yep. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, we are now moving on to look at the issue of mascots. I did have a conversation this weekend with the chair of the State Board of Education, Oliver Olson, who's going to bring forward, I think, a really interesting proposal that, we'll wait to hear from Oliver to see if people endorse it. In the meantime, Chief Stevens, Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
I believe this is your first time in Senate Education, at least in the past couple of years. So if you wouldn't mind, I think one way to start would be just to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, as much as you're comfortable doing so, in your work, and then jump in a little bit to help us navigate what we're trying to do, which I suspect you have been following our work a little bit. But if you have questions for us, we're happy to answer them. So with that, the floor is yours.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me. I am Don Stevens. I am chief of the Nulhegan Band of the Coosac Abenaki Nation. We are one of the larger tribes in Vermont, and we are state recognized. We received state recognition by the legislative body in 2011, and we are recognized as an Abenaki tribe in the state. I'm also just recently transitioned from my role as director of IT of another company to work for the tribe as the executive director of our nonprofit, Abenaki Help in Abenaki, because there's so much demands on health disparities, food insecurity, a whole bunch of other things that we struggle with all the time. And so I am the only employee for our entire nation, the Nulhegan Abenaki Nation. So it's quite a task. And as you are well aware, I have been involved in the political legislative world for many years, working before 2006 on recognition, where we got minority status, to being appointed by Governor Douglas to the first Commission on Native American Affairs, up into being elected as chief of the tribe and working on other things like recognition, hunting and fishing rights, land, getting the first land in 200 years. And now we can proudly say that Middlebury College is now teaching the Abenaki language full-time as one of their core projects or their core languages, which is incredible with a language that's almost extinct. So we've been doing a lot of great work. And I'd like to say that I value your partnership, the legislative partnerships, because you don't always have to tear something down to lift something up. So I think that I value all of you, and I've worked with Senator Chittenden on other roles, I think, from South Burlington, and asking about how do they incorporate agroforestry and other things. So that kind of gives you a little background.
Chief Stevens, if I may, while we have you sort of on this topic before shifting to mascots, would you say a little bit about your work, if there are things that are happening right now through the nonprofit that you referenced in our schools, pre-K through 12th grade? It's exciting to hear what's happening at Middlebury, but I'm wondering if there are other things that may be happening or not happening that you'd like to see happen in our pre-K through 12 institutions.
Yeah, I would love to touch on that, because that's one of the areas that I think we significantly lack. We do have Title VI Indian education. Nulhegan has Indian education, and the Orleans, North Country supervisory unions, and potentially moving to Caledonia. So we have an after-school program for our children, and children that are, whether they're Native or not, it's an after-school program that they can learn about culture and drumming. And we work on doing food programs, like growing gardens and that kind of stuff. We've also offered clinics, like vaccine clinics up in our, we actually rent part of the old Holland Elementary School after the merger. That was vacant for 2 years. So we asked if we could rent one of the spaces, and we have an actual food shelf there, along with a couple other distribution sites for our food. And we do educational programs there. I know Missisquoi has also a Title VI Indian education. You might know Jeff Benet and Brenda Gagne, Circle of Courage. They do a lot in the Franklin County Supervisory Union. So those are the official Indian programs when I say, working with the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education. So those are the Title VI federal programs. One of the things we tried to correct, because Vermont does, a lot of people don't know about Abenaki culture. They haven't
Right.
been exposed to it, and that sort of leads into this mascot issue. Unfortunately, I think if people would be educated on how mascots or other types of things do harm, that maybe they would be able to make an informed consent decision on whether to use something or not. But when they don't have the educational information behind them, then it's hard to make a good decision when you don't have all the facts, right? So we tried to correct that a couple of years ago, and I believe you may have been involved with the H.9 Ethnic Studies Bill. I think it turned into Act 1, which was supposed to provide a avenue of potential curriculum in the school systems. And I think that committee was supposed to meet for a couple of years and provide recommendations of how to move forward with educating people or things within the school district. But it's only a recommendation, right? Like nobody had to teach about us or teach about minority people. I'm not quite sure where that is. It's got to be close to the 2-year mark. But people teach about the Pilgrims, they teach about Thanksgiving, and we get a flood of people wanting to know about that. But there's no kind of mandate to teach about Abenaki education when we're part of the fabric of Vermont, right? It's kind of remiss that we have such issues with social justice because people don't know who we are, and we have no resources. We have limited resources. I know that the legislator gives money to LGBTQ and other people for educational purposes, but we're not afforded any extra funds from yourself or the educational institutions to come in and teach. And as you know, a lot of teachers don't have a lot of funds to be able to pay people. And when you have costs that you need to be covered, it's kind of hard when you're just doing it on a free or really low cost compensation to try to educate the kids. So I wanted to at least generally say that. So I think
That's
the
helpful
education
for us to hear. Yeah.
right, you have to really work on that. I mean, I do go into schools. I've taught, Burlington High School and Colchester. I go to a lot of the schools. I've been to a lot of areas to help educate. And so as in some of our retired or people who are able to work, they come in and do, but there's no structured way of educating unless people contact us and say, can you help? So it's a sporadic thing. And we have some authors that would be great if some of their books could be included in the libraries and other things. I mean, so there's a lot of work around education, I think, that would help with not only social justice, but people just understanding who we are. Because people are afraid of what they don't understand. And when they don't understand it, then they either push it away, ignore it, or try to tamp it down, right? And I want to use that as part of this with the mascot issue, is that this is a no-win situation for Abenaki or Native people. Because it's such a divisive issue, if you take the mascot away, people are going to be upset at us because, oh, it's the Native people who took it away, right? And then if you don't do it, then there'll be people who think it's morally wrong, saying, well, you didn't care, or you didn't want to take it away. So there's I mean, if you're going to have detriment on both sides, what's the moral thing to do? Right. So, do we morally like mascots? No, it doesn't represent us. When people use a big war bonnet headdress, should we be upset at that? Or should they sue? Because that's their culture, not ours. Like, we don't wear big headdresses. I mean, have you ever run through the forest in Vermont with a big headdress? Do you think it'd stay on your head for about 2.3 seconds? I mean, we didn't have that kind of regalia, right? So people don't realize what we wore here. They just see what they see in stereotypes or, in the news or, and I want to go back to some of the teachings that I tend to give in the racial equity classes that I teach, is that, you go to baseball games, and you see people in red face and dressed up in regalia and costumes at, Halloween, and everybody's like, wow, that's cool, or this is, yay, this is our spirit. But then if you have somebody, it's okay to have red face, but then if you do blackface and it becomes a socially unacceptable thing. What's the difference between red face and black face? But they're treated differently because it's acceptable to do stuff against Native people like that, or say, oh, they're just sensitive, but it's not okay in another situation. So part of the education within schools is to actually educate children what's good, what's not, what's our culture, what's not. And I think that's a sorely lacking thing. And like I said, I hate to say it, but white Europeans created the mascots. We didn't, so they're the only ones that can take them away. Really, I mean, because we didn't create this issue, right? I mean, we're just who we are. We didn't tell somebody else to use imagery that doesn't belong to them, that belongs to another culture, right? They decided to do that on their own, so they have to take it away, not me, right? I mean, do we like it? No. Do we think it's morally right? No. But I'm saying is what they give, they have to take away, right? So it's kind of out of our hands. That makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And it was long-winded.
No, it was quite articulate, very helpful, and a good overview as well of some of your work and some of your concerns. So I don't know if you've seen the most recent bill, if you've had a chance to look at that, Chief Steve. The short of it is, and I do think we're going to work today a little bit to make some changes to it as well. I think we're going to get a new proposal, but really the very short of it is giving school districts, maybe a couple of years, if you will, to correct those mascots that do have representation of natives in them or a history there. So really pushing it back to the local decision process, letting people have those conversations locally, learning by exploring, the history of the evolution, if you will, of those mascots, and then going through a process where they would, if need be, change that mascot. And so that's sort of where we are right now. I think there's going to be a much more elegant proposal coming forward from the state board that would be involved in this, but that's the kind of work that we are, the direction that we're moving in.
I always think it's problematic when somebody uses something that's not of their culture, right? I mean, it's always problematic, just because, especially without informed consent. Like, that's why I said it might be good to have Chief Menard speak to you, because the Thunderbirds are a native symbol, but that's a Missisquoi mascot, and many students are Abenaki that go there. Now, is that harmful or not? I can't tell you. Is it? I'm just saying is, if it's not a non-native school using it, that I don't feel that that's appropriate. But if how does the native tribe embrace it or be part of that's in that community, because it represents so many of their students, right? I don't know the answer to that. I think that's a question not for me to answer, because that is something in the Missisquoi territory. We have talked to Danville before in Rutland. I mean, we did give you a letter, I think. I sent that along of how we feel in general about mascots, because this isn't the first time we've run up against this issue. So we have combined how we feel about mascots, because people don't see the underlying issues of what made us be to this point, right? Or they don't have the education about who we are. So again, it's about educating the students and informed consent, in my opinion.
I don't see a letter, Chief Stevens.
I sent it to Daphne.
Okay.
I'll get that reposted. Apologies.
Okay. No problem. Thank you.
It was written by, we got together as a group and we talked, and citizen of El New, Melody Walker, drafted it for us. We were dealing at the time with a mascot issue at Turner's Falls, Mass, and other areas. And we just used the same document to kind of explain how Indigenous people look at mascots and why we think they're incorrect or morally wrong. But that's our opinion, and that's how we feel. So I just wanted to at least put that out there. Like I said, whether somebody changes a mascot or not, how does that uplift our people? How does that make the lives of my citizen better? It might make it better with the kids in school, or it could harm them because people are now focused on the native people took away their mascot. I don't know, but I'm just saying there has to be more than just you take away a mascot or you add a mascot. I think there has to be education around why that is so wrong or why it should be used, or, but I see that being severely lacking. It's just like, hey, you need to change it, but there's no reason why. I mean, there's no mandate to say, why is this so offensive, or why is it okay?
I see a question from Senator Terenzini.
Yeah, I just wanted to express that's one thing that's really severely lacking.
Thank you, Senator Campion. And Chief Stevens, it's nice to meet you, and thanks for being here today.
Nice to meet you.
I am one of the 2 senators in this committee from Rutland County. So, myself and Senator Hooker have really lived out the battle at Rutland High School over the last couple of years in regards to the Raider name and so on. And I have been probably in this committee the least supportive of this bill, because I truly believe that many of these issues should be left at the local level for discussing and decisions to be made. I don't think state government can solve all of our problems, and I'm really sort of a small government localized believer. But my question to you, Chief, is I think long ago compromise could have been struck pretty easily in the Rutland community. In my opinion, anyway, if Rutland had got rid of the arrowhead symbol, and because from my understanding and what I have read and heard, Raider does not necessarily identify Native American culture or any specific tribes in general. Am I correct in saying that? A Raider could be many things, but if the arrowhead had been disbanded, that should have settled much of the frustration and pain points, correct?
Yeah, I have to say that you are correct. A word is a word, right? Like you could have Oakland Raiders, or you could have other Raiders that don't have anything to do with Native connotations. But as soon as that name was founded on Indigenous identity or was founded on Indigenous symbols, then it is inherently linked to that. So it will, regardless if you change it from the arrowhead or not, that term originated from a Indian or a Native image / background, because you can't change your history, right? Because that's pretty much in history for Rutland, that's how the name came about, was through an Indigenous connotation. So yes, you could separate words from imagery, absolutely. But I'm saying is you can't change the history of it. So then the question becomes, do you just separate the imagery and try to rebrand it as something different? Like now I'm going to call it the Frontier Raiders instead of the, whatever. Do you do that? Or do you then, how do you deal with the historical connotation and coming to an understanding of why that's harmful? Because people are just seeing what you're taking away. They're not seeing why, or they're not understanding that. That's why there's such a fight, because people don't understand why it's so, why the connotation is so wrong, or whatever. I mean, because most people think that, oh, well, we're just honoring the warrior spirit. But if you look at all the stereotypes, the warrior is always the guy who goes down in a valiant defeat and gets killed in the end by the cowboys, or, it's never like, hey, they win. I mean, how many movies have you seen where the Indians actually win, right? I mean, so the connotation is just, I think you have to look at the historical context of it, and how do you come to grips with that around any mascot, right? So I don't know if that answers your question. I think it's yes and no. You can separate the imagery from the word and try to rebrand the word. But then how do you deal with the historical context that everybody's still going to remember it as the Arrowhead Raiders and the Indian Raiders? So, or whatever you connotate it. So then that was the question. Then how do you deal with that just to get around the logo?
Yeah, sure. Follow-up question, Senator Kavian?
Please, please.
So just so I can recap, Chief Stevens, and I assume you had been somewhat involved in the Rutland rebranding or trying to remove the Raider name and logo. But if they had 2 years ago, if they had come out and said, "Look, we're gonna drop the arrow, we're gonna move on. We recognize that this could be offensive to some folks, or is offensive to some folks," your tribe still would not have been thrilled that they had not changed the Raider name altogether to something completely different.
Well, I want to clarify your statement because I was not involved in trying to remove the logo. To me, I educated those people on both sides of the fence, both for and against the mascot. I educated them in the same way that I'm doing you. And I said, it's up to you, as a town to decide whether how do you deal with this issue? Because like I said, I didn't create the mascot. So how can I remove it? I can just tell you that in my opinion, it does not represent me. It does not represent our culture. It does not honor me in any way. But, and if people are upset because it's being taken or given without the education of why it's offensive or not, then they're making decisions on without all the information and it's not informed. So I just want to say that do we as a collective indigenous people like mascots? No, because it's part of representing our culture when it's not their culture, right? But I think that people have to make that decision on their own, but they have to have the education and informed consent about why it is what it is. Does that answer your question?
It gives me a better perspective, yes, and I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Terenzini. Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Stevens, for this really informative testimony, because I think it does clarify for me my understanding of where the indigenous people are coming from when we're talking about mascots. And we've talked a lot about education, and you've touched on everything that I was going to ask about. You've touched on the education of people who don't understand where the mascots come from, the history of it, and you can't change the history. You've touched on the piece that I was going to ask you about when people say they're honoring Native American people or others who are, seen as their mascots. And so I really appreciate your explanation of all of this. I'm hoping that we can help to have other people understand where this is coming from and why. My husband taught at Rutland High School for 35 years, and they were the Raiders the whole time. Does that make us complicit when we didn't understand, or all of those people who went through the system for all of those years, not understanding the heartache that it was causing? And, how can we help people to have a better understanding of that?
Yeah, I think that letter too will, that I sent to Daphne will really give you an insight on why we feel mascots are not in the best interest. Now, I acknowledge that people don't create mascots willingly to cause harm, right? I mean, I don't think Danville, Rutland, any of the ones that have mascots intentionally wanted to cause harm to Native people. I don't believe that in my heart, but I'm just saying that is it something that should be continued if they're educated about why that causes harm or why it causes issues? I think, and then if they make a decision based on that information, I still don't think it's malicious. I just think that there's more self-interest in it than it is thinking about what it could do to others. Because if you really think, Abenaki people and Native people have been dehumanized for so many years that it doesn't really raise an eyebrow to people that it could be harmful. And what does that mean? And why? And like I said, this is a situation that just causes more issues for Native people, because the people who really love that mascot, are going to get angry because it is the only reason they're changing it is because Native people don't like it, or the social justice people who want to reverse harm are causing them to change it because it's a Native theme. So they don't go back at the people who are changing it. They go back to what is the root cause of why we have to change it? Because we got them damn Indians here. And if we didn't have them here, it wouldn't be an issue, right? I mean, that kind of really is where we see and where we see hate come from. And like I said, if they keep it, then it becomes a big embroiling about whether it's socially responsible to do it or not, right? Because we are changing, right? Our times are changing where things that used to be accepted, even segregation was accepted at one time, but it wasn't morally right. So I'm just saying is that we evolve as a people and community, and I'm glad that the discussions are being had, because then maybe people might learn more about Indigenous culture. But I don't like how it affects our people or the kids that are involved in these turmoils, because when the town is in turmoil, it's like a ripple effect, right? When you throw a pebble into a water, it ripples out many ways. And, then you see that, right? You see those effects that continue to happen, or that animosity of those alumnus who used to love that name and they're stuck to it, so it does have an impact. It's just, okay.
And we're seeing that, I think, throughout the United States with, Civil War monuments. We're seeing, and this is a time for us to hopefully take some steps and in the right direction. Senator Hooker, did you have a follow-up question at this point?
No, well, I think you had touched on it before, Senator Campion, asking the chief how he feels about the legislation and the direction that it's taking. So I think, it's important for me to understand how you feel.
I'd like to clarify one more thing with Senator Champion is again, the way I look at things as a leader, you don't always have to tear something down to pull something up, to build something up, right? I'm not saying that this mascot should stay and then we build up from there. I'm saying it's like in the case of Lake Champlain, where you just talked about statues. A lot of people wanted to get rid of Lake Champlain, the statue, including Champlain College. And I worked with them to educate them about that. If you really think about the history, even though Champlain was a colonizer, he actually fought on the side of the Abenaki people against the British and the Iroquois. So if you're talking about historical content, yes, he was a colonizer, but he was also a friend of the Abenaki people, right? When it came to helping us with the battle. So they decided that, what they were going to do. I'm just saying that without the context of the history.
Right.
That's what I mean. Is like, if you tear down every statue without analyzing why each one is good or bad, then how do you make a good informed decision?
Yeah. And we're hoping to make those kinds of decisions. Chief Stevens, I don't know if you can stick around while we hear from our additional witnesses, and we may have other questions for you, but I think we're good at this point. You've been very helpful.
Absolutely. I'll stay as long as you need me to.
Okay, Mr. Olson, Ms. Samuelson, I don't know if the two of you are going to be testifying. Good to see you both.
Yes, good to see you.
Good. Wondering if you how you're going to do this. If one or both of you, Oliver?
Yeah, I'll be the principal presenter. And are you okay, Senator Campion, if I walk through a presentation with the committee?
More than happy. We generally use our iPads
Okay.
and not the screen, if that works for you. Do we have the presentation?
Yes, you should all have it.
Great. That was okay. Terrific. And we will pull those up right now.
Okay.
So work for you?
Pardon me?
That work okay for you for your presentation style?
Yep. Okay. So anyway, for the record, Oliver Olson, I'm the chair of the State Board of Education. And with me is Jennifer Samuelson, who's our vice chair. I'll be the principal presenter, but it's likely in the future, depending on where this goes, that Jennifer may take more of a leading role on this as you continue your deliberations. So I wanted to bring her into the conversation early on. So I just want to be clear that the state board has not had any discussion on this particular proposal. So what I'm offering you are some general thoughts and some ideas, with the understanding that we do have some time set aside on our agenda at our next meeting to talk about this, and I'll have some more input from the board. So just with that safe harbor statement, we'll proceed. So looking at the second slide, I just sort of walk through some high level comments. So I think the first overriding comment is that, you know, we really we need to bring, you know, closure to these mascot issues. First and foremost, it's the right thing to do, but also, you know, we're seeing, you know, not everywhere in the state, but we're seeing isolated pockets where, you know, these protracted debates are really disrupting the important work at the local level, and also concerned that, you know, these, you know, can have the effect of attracting single issue candidates to school boards. The second sort of comment I want to throw out there is that the State Board of Education is essentially a board of largely volunteers, and at the moment our rulemaking capacity is constrained. We have several major pieces of rulemaking underway right now. We're wrapping up one piece of rulemaking around independent schools, and we will soon be opening the EQS rules, including rules pertaining to the implementation of Act 1. So I think the bill, as I read, suggested that we would need to have our rulemaking complete by December 2022. Based on rulemaking that, you know, we've undertaken in the recent past, I would suggest that would not be an achievable deadline. So third is just general concern that if we bring the mascot, if we start looking at rulemaking around mascots, that could really disrupt our EQS rulemaking work, particularly as it pertains to the Act 1 components of that work. And I worry that the issues could become conflated, and it would quickly turn into a bit of a mess. So what I really want to talk about today is perhaps a more direct approach. So stepping away from rulemaking as a tool and broadening sort of the focus, and not looking specifically at some of the issues pertaining to Indigenous peoples, but just more broadly at and not just mascots. I think we need to sort of broaden this to look at branding, because when we start having these conversations, in some cases there may be, you know, a physical mascot involved. In other cases, there may be a slogan, and you have to look at the totality of the picture. So you'll see consistently throughout this presentation, I'm making reference to school branding, because I think that really encompasses everything that we're talking about here. But in sum, what I'm going to walk through is a suggestion for consideration that all school branding be approved by the state board using some statutory guidelines, and I'll walk through sort of what I'm thinking there. With a one-time process for the state board to review and approve all the existing branding that's out there, with a default sort of approval if objections aren't raised, and we'll walk through that process. So on the third slide here, I thought it would be useful just to kind of provide a little bit of data on what the landscape looks like. So I went through and analyzed all the various sort of, you know, branding, mascots, what have you out there. And what's interesting is about 45% of the mascots out there are focused around an animal. So, you know, fairly innocuous. We have about 5 that are based on some sort of an object, and then a handful based around a mythical figure, and then about 20 out there. So about, you know, 35% that are based on some sort of defining characteristic of a group of people. So slide 4 gives you a sense on, you know, and this is where I think we run into trouble. So branding that characterizes groups of people in some way. You know, in some cases, I'll take the Slaters as a great example. That's that really speaks to the history of that community and the slate quarrying that's done there. It's pretty clear. A lot of these other ones, you'll see there's some ancient Greek themes here, the Trojans, the Spartans, the Olympians is an interesting one. There's a different set of controversy around that one, apparently. Several years ago, there was threat of litigation by the Olympic Committee over trademark infringement. But then you can see, clearly, you start getting into chieftains, rebels, colonels, things start getting a little interesting. Moving on to slide 5, you'll see that, we have some mascots out there, focused around, some sort of an object, hurricanes, comets, bullets. Mythical figures gets a little interesting. Galloping Ghost, I'm sure you guys have heard a little bit about that one. Thunderbirds, you heard the chief reference that one. So some interesting ones out there. So I thought it'd be interesting just to share kind of what the landscape looks like. So moving on to sort of a potential process to deal with kind of all the existing branding that's out there. So what I want to just throw out there, and again, this is a very high level rough idea, and feel free to pick away at it and or discard it completely. But the idea is that we would open up kind of a window for public review of all the mascots out there, and any individual organization that had some sort of an objection based on standards that would be established in statute could file an objection with the school board and the State Board of Education by August of this year. If no objections were filed, by default, those mascots, the brand, all of that associated branding would be deemed approved. But wherever there was some sort of an objection raised, that would trigger the need for the school board to conduct a self-review, which would include historical research and education to really understand sort of the origins of the mascot and associated branding. And then the board would decide whether it felt that the mascot and the branding was within the statutory standards, and whether they wanted to advocate for the continued use of it, or if they wanted to move on to some new branding. They would then submit that to the State Board of Education by the end of December 2022. The State Board would conduct hearings, issue findings based on the criteria, and either approve or deny those proposals. So importantly, slide 7 outlines a thought on how you might want to look at statutory criteria. And essentially, it's proposed branding would not be able to directly or indirectly reference or stereotype the likeness, features, symbols, traditions, or other characteristics that are specific to the race, creed, color, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity of any person or group of people. And importantly, also any person or group of people or organization associated with the repression of others. And again, to the chief's earlier point, in developing its findings, the State Board would need to consider the historical context and prior use of the proposed branding. Slide 8. Just some other ideas for consideration. One is, perhaps using some of this federal funding that we have, provide some transition funding for school districts that, voluntarily acknowledge non-compliant branding and bring alternatives that are ultimately approved. That funding could be used for, new uniforms and things of that nature. Also, probably worth taking a look at how these standards could also be incorporated into our independent school approval process for schools that are accepting public tuition. And slide 9 just kind of maps out everything we talked about against a timeline. So I kind of walk through all these slides quickly, but happy to open it up for any questions and return to any of the slides.
Committee, questions or comments as outlined by Mr. Olson at this point. Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Olson. I think this is it's a good approach to kind of get it done quickly, but that is also one of my concerns, is that on the two things on the date that people have to raise objections. Like if the bill doesn't pass to July, we're giving people like a month or so perhaps to make these objections. And then two, to Chief Stevens' point, it kind of puts the burden on those that are offended to make the objections. I mean, maybe other people would make the objections on their behalf, but I think it's something to think about. You know, are we kind of, if, for example, on the native mascots or branding, are we forcing them to come forward and have to explain, you know, why it's offensive? So that's the only concern that I see about this, is that there's a deadline, which I can see why you'd want to have it, but I guess I'd be more supportive if it was an open process, because just knowing all the other work the board has to do, maybe it would be better if you had these happening over time instead of having to do them all at once. And so that an objection could come forward at any time. So just my thoughts.
Mr. Olson.
So yeah, I think those are great comments. So just the first one I think is really important on who would be able to raise an objection. I want to be really clear that this does not suggest that only an impacted person or group of people would have standing, if you will. You know, just because something is disrespectful to a particular culture or organization or people doesn't mean it's not offensive to me, right? Or any other person. So I think it's really important to consider that. As far as so the timing, you know, again, I'll leave it to you, you know, to think about what you think is a reasonable timelines. In considering a more aggressive timeline, I sort of took the let's rip the Band-Aid off approach, and I'm sure you're all familiar with you know, some really painful conversations in communities that have become very disruptive, and I think we're just at a point where we need to move on.
Senator Perchlik, did you have a follow-up before I please go ahead?
I just wanted to make sure you saw that Chief Stevens had.
Yes, I did. Chief Stevens, you mentioned that you'd like to comment.
Yeah, I just want to state that if you're going to regulate this, also be aware of, let me give you an example. Say the Nulhegan Abenaki created a school or created something, and all of a sudden you said anything that depicts a racial or person or whatever the case may be, then I would be excluded from using, say, a headdress from our culture. That would be part of our, I'm just saying is if you're making these rules, you need to make some kind of consideration for the people that it culturally affects. So say if you have a Jewish population and they want to use a symbol of whatever, you know, I mean, you don't want to restrict them from using that symbol if it's part of their culture, right? It's more or less having other people that is not part of that culture using something in a way that's not part of their culture belief. I just want you to at least consider that when you're making these rules, whether it be through the Department of Education or whether it be through the legislative body, that there has to be some sort of consideration for the people actually using that. Is it culturally appropriate for them or not? So
Right.
I just wanted to at least take that before you make a blame.
I appreciate you raising that. I'm happy to respond. Or Mr. Olson, do you want to add something? Well, I'm just thinking, I mean, going through this process would indeed allow for the state board. I mean, we could adjust the language accordingly, because I think you bring up a good point, Chief Stevens. But then going through the state board also allows them to evaluate, which I like. If, just as you said, if an Indigenous peoples started a school, they would likely allow, with evidence or whatever, that might be able to stay. Does that make sense, Mr. Olson? Like going through that process.
Exactly. And this was my concern with trying to address this in rules. I started walking through like how you would define those rules and all the different scenarios and permutations when we're not talking about a large volume of situations. It's a relatively small volume of instances we have to deal with here. And I think we really just need to rely on the good judgment of sensible people to look at the unique circumstances on the ground against some general principles and say, yeah, this makes sense, or no, this is a no-go.
Okay. Other Senator Perslick, please.
Thank you. With the board, Mr. Olson, how do you guys feel about, or just you, because I know the whole board doesn't talk about it, is about extending this deadline? Because what happens if after the deadline, a school changes from the bullets to the arrows and is using kind of a native depiction of an arrow, but that's after the deadline, so I just want to make sure we're not just limiting it to such a, whether we switch it to August to December or October, but also if there's an ongoing ability for the board to get involved. Because I agree with you, I don't think it's appropriate to do it through the rules. I think we'll just get tied up in knots. Rules aren't a good way for this. I like the way you've designed it. I think your thinking is good on this. I just worry about trying to constrain it. I know you want to kind of get it over with, but I worry that we would kind of miss out on some issue if we try to constrain it too much.
Yeah, I realize I probably wasn't clearer earlier, but the expectation, this would be a standing requirement. So there's two pieces to it, right? So going forward, any new branding, any change in branding has to go to the state board for approval. But then I said, okay, well, we have to deal with everything that's already out there now. So that the process and the timeline I mapped out was to deal with everything that's in place right now. But then going forward, anytime you want to make a change, you'd have to go through and secure state board approval.
Yeah. Senator Terenzini.
Thank you, Senator Campion. Mr. Olson, nice to meet you. You made a comment when you first began, which I have a little bit of trouble with, when you said that these issues drive one issue candidates to run for office. And I just find it, hard to swallow, because, who are we to decide who runs for office and what their motivations for running are? Many people do get involved at the local level because of one or two issues. Now, maybe it's a mascot, maybe it's for various other reasons. I just find this should not be a motivation of ours to eliminate a pool of people who might want to seek office for one reason or another. If they want to be a one issue candidates, then so be it. They have that right as a democracy.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. They certainly do. But I think what is concerning to me, and I know other members on the board, is when we have candidates whose, where their single issue is on something that is of very little consequence to the education of children.
Ms. Samuelson, you've been sitting there patiently. Did you want to add anything or subtract from something that Mr. Olson has said?
Well, thank you for asking, and hello to everybody. Oliver and I did review his proposal before meeting with you guys today, and I think I like the way he has crafted this in a way that's a little bit more responsive than if we were to engage with rulemaking. The one thing that I just kind of floated, and it was really in response to listening to Chief Stevens, and so full disclosure, I haven't even had a chance to communicate this in detail with Oliver. But one of the things that Chief Stevens said that resonated with me is, for instance, who am I as a person sitting here to decide whether or not something is racially offensive, or if it has been brought about by a group in the majority. So I think it would be really helpful, if we sort of go down this path to enlarge the group that is considering mascots to include a more diverse view, so that we would make sure that we're not imposing our views on other people in a way that might be missing the mark.
So if you don't mind, I'll just jump in. So sort of in consultation with language, perhaps might be the way to go that brings in the most voices. Perhaps you would both be comfortable there. I think it's certainly a good request. That way, Chief Stevens and others could weigh in and be helpful. Okay. Other questions or comments? I'm sorry, Ms. Samuelson, did you want to add something else?
No, thank you, though.
Sure. Okay. Ms. Samuelson is a constituent, so I don't want to annoy her in any way. As for Oliver and others, it's a different story. Other questions or comments at this point? Yeah, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Mr. Olson, I appreciate the work that you've put into this and the thought that both of you have put in. My question is, what happens if the board denies the mascot or the logo or whatever? What's the result of that?
I mean, the state board, right?
The state board.
Yeah, the state board. So what we've put in here is a suggestion that that the local school board would need to include a second and third, preference if their first preference was not successful.
Does that answer your question, Senator? Is that helpful? Or were you thinking in a different way? Were you thinking? Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, what happens? This process could go on and on, it seems. We've seen it happen in our community where we thought that the issue was resolved and then it was overturned. And, how do we bring closure to something like this?
Yeah, I can just speak for myself. I'm hoping that this process I'm trying to do a combination of, I think, what Senator Terenzini has raised quite a bit in this committee, which I agree with and respect. Are there ways for local folks, local school boards and others to have these conversations that can be learning experiences, but also make sure that we're not talking about it, in 10 years, that these things. So that's, I think, partly the balance we're trying to figure out at this point. Mr. Olson, did you want to add something?
No, I think that to answer Senator Hooker's question, that all the details haven't been fleshed out here, but definitely what the objective here is to try to bring closure to these issues. So it's not to promote a system where we can keep flipping back and forth, and hopefully by sort of elevating it to the state board to make these final decisions, we can sort of free the local boards from having to get embroiled in these ongoing debates.
Ms. Samuelson?
Yeah, I was just thinking that to answer the question, I think by putting, vesting ultimate decision-making authority with the State Board of Ed, it really does prevent the flip-flopping back and forth at the school board level.
Other questions, comments at this point? Personally, I really appreciate the effort that the two of you put into this. This is, I think, very helpful to us. I want to speak for the entire committee, but I think it takes us in the right direction. And we'll, after we have a little bit of a break, we'll continue to discuss it. And I think then we'll give some direction to our ledge council. We may need to have the two of you back in as we finalize and pull things apart a little bit. And as we've all said, we need to flush some stuff out, but this is very helpful. So thank you both very much. We realize how busy you are, and for you to put this kind of time and effort, it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Great.
And just as I close out here, I did have a conversation with Sue Siglowski from the School Boards Association. I see she's on here, so I gave her a very rough outline directionally where we are going with this, and I know she has a meeting with her board tomorrow
night, I believe.
Yeah. So
we're going to hopefully get her in. I talked to her as well over the weekend and thinking maybe Thursday or Friday after, and hopefully we can give her some more specific direction that we're moving in so that she can share that. Okay, anything else? Okay, committee, let's just take 10 minutes. Is that okay? We'll start up again at 3 o'clock. Okay, thanks everybody. Good to see you all.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Chief. Really appreciate it.